He never planned to become a legend. James Lawrence, just a simple man with a modest background, never imagined he'd one day be spoken about on global stages. In his early years, James wasn't exceptional at anything. He was shy, average in academics, never a sports star, never a leader, never the kid who got picked first in anything. He grew up quietly observing, quietly doubting himself, and quietly dreaming. Not wild dreams, just dreams of being something more than ordinary. But life had other plans for James. After settling into adult life, marrying the love of his life, and having children, he finally began to feel like his world had found balance. There was love, there was family, and there was purpose. He worked regular jobs. He smiled through the stress like many do. But there was a void growing quietly inside him, one he couldn't name. A restlessness that made his heart pound harder in the silence. A whisper that said, "Is this really all there is?" It wasn't adventure he wanted. It was something deeper, something spiritual, something that could shake him awake. That chance came, but not in the way anyone hopes for. It came through fear, through vulnerability, through a moment that cracked his soul open wide. The moment came one afternoon, in a doctor's office that smelled too clean. James had been struggling with chronic exhaustion, weird symptoms, and a gut feeling that something wasn't right. Tests were done, more tests, then silence, and then finally, words he could never forget. "You've got a tumor. We're still running tests, but we need to act quickly." In that second, James felt like the world was made of glass, and someone had just shattered it. His heartbeat roared in his ears, his breath caught. He looked at the doctor, his mouth moving but not forming words. Time didn't slow down, it stopped. He thought about his wife, his kids. He thought about unfinished plans and broken promises. And for the first time in his life, he felt completely helpless. The following weeks were a blur. Hospital visits, blood work, scans, biopsies, terms he couldn't pronounce, side effects he couldn't explain. Nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd even be alive a month from now. But worse than the sickness was the powerlessness, the fear of not knowing what tomorrow held, the fear of being forgotten. But in the middle of that darkness, James began to change. The same way a caterpillar must break down completely to become a butterfly, James' soul was undergoing a violent transformation. And as his body weakened, his spirit grew wild and sharp. One night, when the pain was too much and sleep refused to come, he stumbled across a video. It wasn't long, it wasn't particularly emotional. Just a man talking about endurance running, but something clicked. Something deep inside James screamed in recognition. He didn't know why, but he knew what he had to do. He decided, with a certainty that terrified everyone around him, that if he survived this, if he got another shot at life, he would do something extraordinary with it. Something impossible, something mad. He started by walking. Literally, he began with a few steps in the hallway outside his hospital room. Nurses raised eyebrows. His wife cried in frustration. "You need to rest," they said. "You're not ready." But James wasn't listening to them. He was listening to the voice inside, the one that said, "Keep going." The steps turned into walks, the walks into jogs, the jogs into quiet morning runs before the sun was up. He trained in pain. He ran while nauseous. He ran while fighting fatigue that most people would stay in bed over. And all the while, the whispers around him got louder. He's pushing too hard. He's in denial. He's gonna break himself. But James didn't break. He bent. He adapted. He evolved. He set his first goal modestly. A 5K. He collapsed. At the end of it, then he set a bigger one. A 10K. His knees burned. His lungs screamed. But he crossed that line. Then a half marathon. Then a full. By now, people had stopped whispering. Now they were watching. James wasn't the fastest runner, but he was the most relentless. Every finish line reminded him that he was alive. Every medal reminded him of hospital gowns and 4 drips and the scent of antiseptic. And then, he set a goal that would become legend. He wanted to run 7 marathons, in 7 days, on 7 continents. His wife thought he was joking. His kids laughed. Even he wasn't sure he could do it. But the man who had stared death in the eye knew one truth: no one else could understand you. Don't live twice. And if this was the one life he got, he was going to squeeze every ounce out of it. He trained in silence. While the world scrolled, posted, tweeted, and bragged, James ran, not for followers, not for likes, but for the man he used to be, lying broken on a hospital bed, wondering if he'd see another season. Every morning he tied his laces with reverence, like a soldier, donning armor. The trail became his church, the sweat, his confession, the pain, His prayer. Training for 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days wasn't just a physical challenge, it was war. His legs screamed rebellion, his back ached from hours of relentless pounding. He began training his gut to handle fuel like a machine. He studied sleep science, weather patterns, altitude changes. He wasn't preparing for a race, he was preparing for battle against himself and the planet. Money was a problem. Logistics were a nightmare. Crossing borders, securing flights, dealing with customs, but piece by piece, obstacle by obstacle, James chipped away at the impossible. Sponsorships trickled in. A small team formed a part logistics, part believers. His wife, though terrified, stood beside him. She knew that this wasn't about marathons. It was about legacy, about purpose. The first marathon, Antarctica, snow bit at his face. The cold gnawed at his joints. But with each step, he remembered hospital nights where even standing was agony. Now he was running on ice, breathing in air so crisp it felt like glass in his lungs. He crossed the finish line with numb hands raised to the sky. One down. Then South America. The sun was brutal. Timidity wrapped around him like chains. But James didn't slow. Locals cheered. His team fed him gels and water like clockwork. His legs trembled. His eyes stayed locked on the horizon. He finished, barely upright. North America. This one was personal. Home soil, family waiting, cameras flashing. The pressure was intense. He had to show them he wasn't insane. He had to prove that he wasn't chasing ego but pushing limits. He ran through familiar streets, through cities that once knew him as that quiet guy. Now they watched him sprint toward myth. Europe. Jet lag hit like a hammer. He slept in airplane seats, ate airport meals. His stomach revolted, his calves cramped. But when the whistle blew, he was already running. Through narrow cobblestone streets, past centuries-old buildings. His lungs burned from cold wind, but the roar of strangers calling his name was louder than the pain. Africa, heat like fire, roads like razors. James ran alongside wildlife, through villages and dust. He waved at children, took strength from strangers. At one point, he scraped knees, bloodied hands. His team panicked, but James got up, wiped the dust from his face, and kept running. Asia, urban madness. Pollution hung in the air, cars honked, streets buzzed. His head pounded. But here too, the mission mattered, more than pain. As he crossed the line, soaked in sweat, media started paying attention. Who is this guy? They asked. But James didn't stop for interviews. He had one left. Australia. The final frontier. His body was nearly done, toenails black, muscles torn, eyes bloodshot. His wife flew in, held his face before the race. "Come home safe," she said. He nodded, but in his heart, he knew he wouldn't stop, even if it killed him. The race began. Every step was war. His heart raced dangerously, but he kept going. His name was being chanted by people he'd never met. He collapsed across the finish line. 7 marathons, 7 days, 7 continents. The world now knew his name. But James Lawrence didn't do it for fame. He did it for the hospital bed. For the moment he thought he'd die. For every man and woman who's been told, "You can't." He didn't just prove them wrong. He redefined what the human soul is capable of. After completing the impossible 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days, most people expected James to stop, rest, retire, maybe write a book, maybe give a few speeches. But James wasn't interested in being a headline. He wasn't chasing a moment. He was chasing mastery. The kind of mastery that comes not from talent, but from relentless repetition, from pain, from showing up when no one's watching. He returned home a different man, physically exhausted, emotionally cracked open, spiritually alive, but he couldn't sit still. While his body screamed for recovery, his soul whispered louder, "There's more." The fire hadn't gone out, it had only just begun to roar. James understood something most people never realize. Momentum is a fragile thing. If you don't keep feeding it, it dies. So instead of fading into comfort, he made a new decision, a crazier one that made even his closest supporters question his sanity. He announced he would attempt something no human had ever done: 50 Ironman triathlons, in 50 days, in 50 different US states. Each Ironman consisted of a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike ride, and a 26.2-mile run. One race alone breaks seasoned athletes. 50 in a row. People laughed, called it a PR stunt, called it reckless, called it dangerous. Even the endurance community doubted him. But James wasn't listening to the world. He was listening to something far louder, the voice of every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. Training began. And this wasn't ordinary training. James wasn't preparing for a race, he was preparing for a mental war, a physical rebellion, an emotional resurrection. He studied his sleep like a scientist, hacked his nutrition like a biohacker, rewired his mind like a monk. His life became a lab of limits, and he kept pushing the ceiling higher. His family was with him every step. His wife, Sunny, a warrior in her own right, became the foundation, the planner, the protector, the one who reminded him why this mattered when his bones forgot. His kids became his fuel. Their tiny cheers at every finish line reminded him that this was about legacy, not records. But as the start date neared, doubts crept in. Logistics fell apart. Sponsors backed out. A week before launch, weather delays threatened the flights. At one point his RV broke down in the middle of nowhere. Sleep deprivation blurred his vision, but James didn't flinch. Every problem was a puzzle. Every obstacle was a test. He didn't complain, he adapted. And then it began. Day 1, Ironman, swim, bike, run, finish, collapse, travel, wake up, repeat. Day 2, same thing. Day 3, same thing. By day 10, his feet were blistered open, toenails falling off, his legs stiff like rusted steel. By day 15, he started hallucinating during bike rides. He saw animals that weren't there, trees that danced, road signs that disappeared. His team watched, in terror, but James, he smiled. Pain meant progress. Day 20, he faced his first mental breakdown. He broke down sobbing during the run, not from injury, not from stress, but from the unbearable weight of continuing. His body was rejecting every command. His knees buckled, his heart rate spiked. But he remembered something a coach once told him: when your mind says you're done, you're only 40% done. He kept running. Day 27, he woke up and couldn't move his legs. His crew considered calling off the challenge. Even Sunny said, "We can stop. You've already done more than anyone." But James shook his head slowly. "If I can stand, I can finish," he whispered. And he stood. Day 30, a storm hit mid-swim in one of the lakes. The currents pulled him in all directions. His goggles fogged. He swallowed water. His arms felt like anchors. But every time he thought he'd sink, he imagined his daughter's voice cheering from the shore. And somehow, he finished. Day 33, his bike tire exploded mid-ride on a downhill slope. He skidded across gravel, cutting his arm open. Blood poured down his elbow. His team rushed to him, horrified. But he wiped it with his shirt, fixed the tire, and got back on. That didn't count as rest, he joked. By day 38, the media had caught on. He wasn't just a man running races anymore, he was a movement. Kids in wheelchairs waited for him at finish lines. Cancer survivors handed him medals. Veterans saluted him as he passed. The story was no longer about James Lawrence. It was about what we are all capable of when we remove the word impossible. But day 41 nearly broke him. That was a scorching day in the south. Humidity made breathing a chore. His stomach was in knots. Halfway through the bike leg he started vomiting. Every mile felt like his last. His vision blurred. His balance swayed. His team begged him to stop, just for one day. But he didn't. He walked the marathon that night, in complete silence. No crowd, no music, just his shadow under the streetlights. It took him 8 hours. He finished at 2:47 a.m. Then he boarded a plane for the next state. And kept going. Day 45. He collapsed mid-run. EMTs checked his vitals. "He's on the edge," they said. But James stood again. "Edge is where I live now," he replied. Day 47. A child handed him a drawing that read, "You're my hero. I'm fighting cancer too." James cried. By day 50, thousands had gathered to watch him finish. He limped across that final finish line in Utah with his kids running beside him, Sunny waiting at the tape, his hands raised high, his eyes full of tears. He had done it. 0.50 Ironman triathlons, 50 states, 50 days. The world called it impossible. James Lawrence called it Tuesday, and in that moment, he proved something that would ripple for generations. Strength isn't what you're born with, it's what you build, mile by mile, choice by choice, when everything in you wants to quit. After completing 50 Ironmans in 50 states in 50 days, James Lawrence's name was etched into history books. But for him, it wasn't about records. It wasn't even about respect. It was about freedom from self-doubt, from fear, from the chains of you can't. His body was broken, but his spirit had never been stronger. Most people thought the story ended there, but it did, and single quotes did up, because James knew that legacy isn't built in a single race. It's built in the quiet days after the world stops clapping. So, While the cameras packed up and the headlines faded, he went back to the one place he found truth, the road. He didn't stop running. He didn't stop challenging himself. But now, the mission had evolved. James had turned into a symbol of strength, but of transformation. He began mentoring others, not as a coach, but as a reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stop negotiating with excuses. He started visiting schools, prisons, recovery centers, seeing where people felt hopeless. He told his story not like a superhero, but like a man who simply refused to quit. He spoke of failure more than success, of breakdowns more than victories. He told them about nights where he cried quietly in motel bathrooms because his legs wouldn't move, and mornings where he still stood up anyway. And that's when the true shift happened. People who had never run a mile in their life signed up for marathons. A single mother fighting depression started walking a mile a day after hearing his story. A teenager who had attempted suicide 3 times found meaning in endurance, telling James, "If you can do what you did, I can survive this." He wasn't just changing lives anymore, he was saving them. But even as his influence grew, James felt the weight of silence. Fame brought attention, but also pressure. Trolls accused him of faking distances. Media twisted his words. Some races didn't go as planned. Injuries crept back in. Doubt tried to return. The same inner voice that once said, "Go," began whispering, "You've done enough. Rest." But James knew better now. He had learned to distinguish between real exhaustion and the lies of comfort. He didn't ignore rest, he embraced it, but only when earned. And so, once more he made a decision that would leave the world breathless. He called it the Conquer 100, 100 Ironman races, 100 consecutive days. The world gasped. Even his own fans questioned it. Why? They asked. But James had already found the answer. Because someone out there is watching. Someone is drowning, and if I can show them that the impossible is possible even just one more time maybe, they'll fight for one more day. The journey began, and it was harder than anything before. His body wasn't the same. Recovery was slower, he was older, he had more scars, more pain, but also more pain, but also more purpose. Each day began before dawn. Swim, bike, run, ice, repeat. The weather attacked. Winds howled, roads cracked, muscles tore. He cried more in this journey than any other. On day 23 he broke down mid-swim, screaming underwater from sheer pain. His shoulders locked. He floated there for minutes, wondering if this was the moment to stop. But when he emerged, gasping, he looked at his wife on the shore, holding a handmade sign that read, "Do hard things," and he kept going. Day 47, his knees gave out mid-marathon. He crawled part of the way. Local police offered to take him to the hospital. He smiled and said, "Not today." A few miles later, a 9-year-old cancer survivor ran beside him, barefoot, holding his hand. On day 76, storms destroyed the course. The path was flooded, but James didn't cancel. He ran in mud up to his ankles, slipped, fell, got up. Again and again. By day 90, his body was in open revolt. He had trouble eating, trouble sleeping, trouble walking. But he remembered something. Comfort kills potential, and greatness demands sacrifice. He finished his 100th Ironman surrounded by thousands. There were no dry eyes. His kids ran beside him again. This time, they were older. They understood. His wife, the silent hero through it all, hugged him with the kind of embrace that only war-forged love knows. He collapsed, but not from defeat, from fulfillment. James didn't run for medals, or sponsors, or history. He ran to prove to the world and to himself that limits are lies. In the years that followed, James continued speaking, mentoring, challenging others. But most importantly, he reminded every room he entered of one truth: we are capable of far more than we think when we stop giving up. He became more than an athlete, more than a speaker. He became a mirror, showing people their own power. And now his story lives on, not in finish lines, but in every person who dares to try. Because the moment you decide to stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being the architect of your comeback, you become unstoppable, and that is where real legacy begins.